All right, what's up, everybody? This is Miss Lynch here, and this is the lecture for Chapter 27, Part 1. If you have already tried to open up that PowerPoint presentation, you will notice that the first handful of slides are, a copy of the last few slides from 26. I'm sorry that happened, and if that's confusing. So if you open that up, it starts with the Reagan Revolution, which is from 26. And this chapter doesn't actually start until slide number 10, where it says chapter 27. I apologize. This is a version I had used last semester. A longer class I had stacked up lectures, so they got 26 and a half and then 27. So that's the version you guys got. Sorry if that's confusing. I started recording this and I was like, I already said all of these things unless I had a fever dream and I'm remembering lectures from months ago. But yeah, so we will just get started from slide number 10 in this this PowerPoint. If you got a version that starts where it should, awesome. Just ignore everything I said over the last minute and a half. Okay, so chapter 27, let's get into it. Okay, all right, so we are kind of picking up from 1988, 1989. All right, so yeah, let's talk about the end of the Cold War. Sorry again for the confusion. I confused the heck out of myself. So anyway, all right. So we will begin with a post-Cold War world, all right? So the Berlin Wall comes down November 1989, November 9th. People from both sides of the wall in Berlin, primarily the east side, East Berlin, began demolishing the wall, and within hours they had taken a chunk of it out, and this represents the true beginning of the decline of the Cold War, okay? So that happens November 1989, and by the end of 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, all right? So, all right, a new world order, question mark? So, after Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George Sr., will come into office, and his first major foreign policy action was to overthrow Manuel Noriega in Panama. This was presented as an act of intervention, okay? Which I know we've talked about that, of that pattern from the United States. But so, this is another act of intervention. Okay, and the 1990s will bring us into the Gulf War, okay? It's happening in Kuwait. U.S. involvement in this really centered around when Bush intervened when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, 1990. This will lead to Operation Desert Storm, okay? In February of 1991, in which the Iraqi army was driven out of Kuwait. The United Nations ordered that Iraq was to disarm and imposed economic sanctions that produced widespread civilian suffering, which talked about this a little bit before, but the idea of human rights as a global conversation happening, that will be a large defining term for the 1990s, okay? This is part of it, okay? So the world is seeing what is going on with civilians during all of this. Yes, and so the discussion of human rights will grow very much during this time, okay? Okay, so Bush identified the Gulf War as the first step in the struggle to create a world based on democracy and global free trade. Okay, again, the United States going overseas to spread our ideals. Okay. So this will take us to the election of Bill Clinton. Okay, yeah, economic recession in 1991, which makes sense. We're in a military conflict, remember? Clinton is elected. He is also charismatic, you know, not surprising. Most politicians are, okay? He's a social liberal, fiscal conservative. Yeah, and then he rebuilt his popularity by campaigning against a radical Congress. Okay, and then I'm going to skip this slide, his political strategy. Yeah, we don't need to get into that too much. Well, I take that back. I am going to go into it. Okay. So he abolished the program of aid to families with dependent children, embraced most popular Republican policies, such as welfare reform. There is, the 90s see a big shift in the welfare system that will affect lots of people in, our major cities. Anyway, I know that we'll get into that here in a few, I do believe. But anyway, okay. So there's a welfare reform going on during this time. His opponents at the extreme political or positions, unpopular with suburban white middle class voters. There is a resurgence in the discussion of reproductive rights, also environmental protection. Okay, so those things that had been discussed in the 60s and 70s come about again in the 90s. This next generation, it's still things that we're talking about right now, again. But yeah, so Clinton defeats Bob Dole in 96. Okay, becoming the first Democratic president elected to 2 terms since FDR. All right. International affairs, there I can say that. So let's look at Clinton and world affairs. So Clinton took steps to encourage the settlement of long-standing international conflicts and tried to elevate support for human rights. Like I said, that will become a big thing in the 90s, to a central place in international relations. So effective in that sense, right? Okay. So like Jimmy Carter, Clinton found it difficult to balance the concern for human rights with strategic and economic interests. There is the genocide in Rwanda that occurs, and I don't have a year marked down, but this is 94, where 800,000 people were killed and 2 million refugees fled because of the violence that was occurring there. So U.S. interventionism came into play because this was a human rights issue. Okay, so Rwanda is a large talking point in the human rights discussion during this time, and then the Balkan crisis. Remember, we're talking about the end of communism. So what's going on in the Balkan region during this is the collapse of communism and a resurgence in ethnic cleansing, okay? So let's look at this next slide, which is about human rights. This is still in line. Okay, so human rights emerged as justification for interventions in matters once considered to be internal affairs of sovereign nations. So, this is growing enough to garner support in intervening in situations like this where, genocide is occurring, okay? Okay, human rights organizations expanded agendas during the 90s, and U.S. military missions began to protect civilians, again, like I said, in situations like Rwanda and the Balkans, okay? Okay. little change in tone, although still about globalization, because going off of human rights, that became a global discussion. This is internationally being addressed. And a significant explanation for why that is able to occur is because of a shift in technology occurring during this time, the rise of the internet, all right, and an interconnectivity that will happen, okay? So just it makes communication a lot easier and will speed up lines of communication and just the way we live. This has affected everything that we, experience today, including what I'm doing here right now, okay? So globalization is this concept, was referred to as the concept of the 90s. Like I said, this comes about with, so the computer revolution specifically, but so computers and the internet, they produce a new economy. And really, this just is about the hardware, well, software and hardware behind all of this, but all the technology fueling this new economy, okay? So microchips will play a significant part in that. Okay, so microchips made possible the development of a whole new line of products. So videos, video games, cell phones, digital cameras, everything that we use, basically, all right? And the computer transformed American life in a way that hadn't been seen since, television, before that, radio, before that, electricity. But so the internet is our defining technological advancement, okay, of our time, okay? So by the year 2000, half of all U.S. homes had a computer in them. Okay, and the internet expanded the flow of information and communications, like I said, more rapidly than any invention since the printing press. So, going way back, right? Okay. Where are we? Alrighty. So going along with our globalization theme here. Okay, so let's look at what's going on with the economy during the 90s and then up until 2000. Okay, so in the U.S., economic growth and talk of a new a new economy sparked a frenzied boom in the stock market, which was reminiscent of the 1920s. This is our tech boom, okay? And investors were especially attracted to the new dot-coms, companies that conducted business via the internet and seemed to symbolize the promise of the new economy, right? So dot-coms, just websites, right? So the economy is doing very well during all of this, and that ends. This bubble bursts on April 14th, the year 2000, when stocks suffered their largest one-day drop in history, okay? Okay, what am I doing on time? Since I got my numbers mixed up, let me just do a little quick math. 12, and then... Okay, sorry. Okay, let's just talk about Enron for 1 second. When that bubble burst, a lot of it had to do with, think about the Gilded Age, think about that corruption that was going on, and then when that kind of implodes on itself, we have the progressive era coming about, okay? But so our tech boom and everything that's going on in the 90s, when that bursts, it's because of all of this corruption that had been going on within very large corporations like Enron, okay? This is known as the Enron syndrome, all right? There are other groups that will be outed during this time. So, okay, Only after the market dropped did it become apparent that the stock boom of the 90s had been fueled in part by fraud. Who'd have thunk? Okay, so Enron is the first company that it's revealed that they were fraudulent, and guess what? They weren't doing anything. Like, they were not producing anything. So the system, yeah, this whole corporation was just developed. It was represented as a tech firm. But yeah, when it came down to it, they had been just getting paid for years for making it seem like they were being productive somehow. Okay, but so Enron, they were a Houston company, I should say, defunct now, but they bought and sold electricity without producing it. Okay, so that's what this comes down to. Yeah, you're welcome to get out there and read the depths of which this all reached. But so Enron is our first company to be revealed as fraudulent, and then there are other companies like JP Morgan, Chase, Citigroup. Corporate lawyers are very much involved in this. Halliburton was also on this list during the time, and Dick Cheney, we're not to that point just yet. We're right at the turn of that, though. But Dick Cheney, who will become vice president, was involved with Halliburton. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the gilding of this age all started to peel away, is what it comes down to, okay? Let's see. Yeah, I'll make this my last slide, and then we will pick up with culture wars. But so, okay, this last slide, rising inequality. So this boom that then busts. The boom that began in 1995, it benefited nearly all Americans. Everyone's buying into technology in every capacity during this time. So, however, overall, during the last 2 decades of the 20th century, the poor and middle class became worse off, while the rich became significantly significantly richer. So our class divisions, that have always been there, just reinforce themselves once again. So the economy, in large part due to NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement, this eliminated barriers for imports from Canada and Mexico, so our Western Hemisphere. Okay, so the U.S. economy, because of NAFTA in large part, continued to shift away from manufacturing, okay, sending more of those jobs elsewhere. And an industrial belt developed along the southern border. So companies that ended up creating factory towns along the U.S.-Mexico border, they could employ workers overseas for a fraction of what it costs in the United States. Walmart is the largest corporate employer in the U.S. now. So this is in the U.S. and Mexico. So by 2010, they are the largest corporate employer, and they are strongly opposed to unions, which still stands. Anyway, okay, so let's see, I'm gonna end there, and our next slide, yeah, I will pick up with the culture wars, and we will talk about immigration. So, thinking about how companies are using immigrant labor, and then we will kind of use that as our cliffhanger, and I will continue on that point in the next video, okay? If you guys need anything, let me know. Shoot me an email, and otherwise I will see you for the second half of this. Okay, bye.